Meditations on the Tarot, Letter 10, The Wheel of Fortune. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes 1:2-9. For us men and for our salvation he came down from heaven. By the power of the Holy Spirit he became incarnate from the Virgin Mary and was made man. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. From the Creed. And I applied my mind to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Ecclesiastes 1:17-18. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Matthew 5:4. Dear unknown friend, we have before us a wheel which rotates, and three figures in animal form, of which two, the monkey and the dog, turn with the wheel, whilst the third, the Sphinx, is beyond the movement of the wheel. He is seated on a platform above the wheel. The monkey descends in order to rise again. The dog rises in order to descend again. First one and then the other pass before the Sphinx. Simple and natural questions which arise spontaneously when one looks at the card are: why do the monkey and the dog turn with the wheel? Why is the Sphinx there? How many times will the monkey and the dog pass before the Sphinx? And why are there these meetings with the Sphinx? Once having posed these simple questions, we find ourselves already at the heart of the 10th Arcanum, plunged into the very sphere of notions and ideas which it is called to awaken. In fact, the wheel alone, without its two passengers and without the Sphinx seated above it, evokes only the idea of a circle, or at most that of circular movement. The wheel with the two animals, the one rising and the other descending, without the Sphinx above it, evokes the idea of a vain and absurd game. But the wheel turning with its two passengers and the Sphinx dominating the whole makes the onlooker ask himself if this is not an arcanum, i.e. a key that one has to know in order to be able to orientate oneself, in this case in the domain of problems and phenomena relating to the circular movement of living beings. It is especially the Sphinx above the wheel which gives us an intellectual shock and which impels us to seek out the arcanum of this card. Now, there are two categories of ideas concerning the genetic relationship and the general genesis of the four kingdoms of nature: the mineral realm, the plant realm, the animal realm, and the human realm, which have their root in the intellectual life of humanity. The one is based on the idea of the fall, i.e. degeneration and descent from above below. According to this class of ideas, it is not the monkey who is the ancestor of man, but rather, on the contrary, it is man who is the ancestor of the monkey, which latter is a degenerate and degraded descendant. And the three kingdoms of nature below the human kingdom are, according to this set of ideas, the projected residue or exteriorization of the comprehensive being of primordial man or Adam, who is the original prototype and synthesis of all the entities comprising the four kingdoms of nature. The other class of ideas comprises the idea of evolution, i.e. progress transforming from below above. According to this category of ideas, it is the most primitive entity from the point of view of consciousness as well as biological structure, which is the origin of all beings in the four kingdoms of nature and which is their common ancestor. The card of the 10th major arcanum of the tarot represents a monkey, i.e. an animal with a face still preserving features that one cannot fail to recognize as human, who is falling. For it is not the monkey who is climbing down, but rather it is the movement of the wheel which carries him along. In descending, the monkey raises his head because he is not descending of his own accord. From where does he descend, this animal with a head bearing human features? He descends from the place where the Sphinx is sitting. The crowned and winged sphinx, with a human head and an animal body, and holding a white sword, represents the plane and the stage of being from which the monkey is moving away and towards which the dog is approaching. Now, if you had had the task of portraying the idea of the fall in the sense of degeneration from the comprehensive being, the prototype of all nature, wouldn't you have shown the Sphinx crowned above as the only possible figure representing the unity of the human and the animal kingdom, the latter in turn being the synthesis of the plant and mineral kingdoms? And wouldn't you have portrayed one figure descending in the course of animalization, deprived of the crown, the sword and the wings, but yet still with features bearing witness to its origin, i.e. would you not have chosen the monkey to represent the transition from the prototype state of comprehensive being to the state of reduced and specialized being? Does not the monkey lend itself marvelously to serve as a symbol of the animalization which is effected at the expense of the angelic and human elements of the prototype being? On the other hand, if you had wanted to give visual expression to the nostalgia of fallen and fragmented beings for the lost state of fullness and integration, would you not choose the dog, the animal most passionately drawn and attached to the human element, as a symbol of the aspiration of animals towards union with human nature, i.e. the aspiration towards the Sphinx, where animal nature is united to human nature? The card of the 10th Arcanum therefore reaches, through its actual context, an organism of ideas relating to the problem of the fall and the reintegration, according to Hermetic and biblical tradition. It portrays the whole circle, including ascent as well as descent, whilst the transformism of modern science is occupied with only half of the circle, namely the half of ascent or evolution. The fact is that certain eminent scientists, such as Edgar Dacqué in Germany and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin in France, advanced the postulate of the pre-existence, be it only potentially, of a prototype of all beings, which is the ultimate as well as the effective cause of the whole process of evolution, and this postulate alone renders evolution intelligible. However, it in no way changes the fact that science works on the basis of the fundamental supposition that the minimum is the ancestor of the maximum, the simple is the ancestor of the complicated, and that it is the primitive which produces the more developed organism and consciousness, although for thought, i.e. reason, this is absolutely unintelligible. This basic scientific presupposition renders evolution unintelligible because it disregards half of the circle, namely all that which precedes, be it only in ordine cognoscendi, the state of primitivity from which science takes its point of departure. Because one has to renounce thought and reduce it to lethargy in order to be able to sincerely believe that man evolved from the primitive and unconscious particles of a primordial mist which was once our planet, without this mist bearing within itself the seed of all possibilities for future evolution, which is the process of eclosion, i.e. the process of transition from a potential state to an actual state. Thus Arnold Lunn, editor of the book Is Evolution Proved?, writes that he would certainly like to believe in evolution and accept it as proved if he could surmount 4 difficulties, including the following. Quote, "For the fact is that no evolutionist had produced a plausible guess, much less a theory supported by evidence, to suggest how a purely natural process could have evolved from the mud, sand, mists and seas of the primeval planet, the brain that conceived Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and the reactions to the beauty of music, of art and of nature." Is Evolution Proved? Page 333. It is my painful duty to have to add to the above quotation the reply by William S. Beck, author of Modern Science and the Nature of Life, to the difficulty to which Arnold Lunn draws attention. He says, "It seems that the argument against evolution is pure metaphysical brocade, artfully draped so as to obscure the cogent evidence of science." William S. Beck, Modern Science and the Nature of Life, page 133. Metaphysical brocade or not, it does not matter. The fact of the unintelligibility for human thought of the theory, not the facts, of evolution, advanced by science, nevertheless remains a fact. It is and always will be unintelligible insofar as it takes consideration of only half of the whole circle of evolution, and refuses to accept the other half of the circle, that of involution or the fall, which would make it intelligible. Now, the 10th major arcanum of the tarot represents a circle, a wheel comprising both the descent or departure from the comprehensive prototype being and the ascent towards this being. The doctrine of the circle of involution and evolution is generally a platitude in occult literature, but it is not so when it is a matter of involution understood as the fall and evolution understood as salvation. There is a world of difference between the Orientalistic doctrine concerning the semi-automatic process of involution and evolution, and the Hermetic, Biblical, and Christian doctrine concerning the fall and salvation. The former sees in the circle of involution-evolution only a purely natural process, similar to the process of respiration in a living organism, animal or human. The Hermetic, Biblical, and Christian tradition, in contrast, sees here a cosmic tragedy and drama full of the supreme dangers and risks that the traditional terms perdition and salvation imply. Fall, perdition, redemption, salvation are words which, truth to tell, are devoid of meaning, both for a spiritually orientated evolutionist and for an evolutionist who is scientifically orientated. The former sees in cosmic evolution the eternal, circular movement of exteriorization and interiorization, the exhalation and inhalation of divine cosmic respiration. What fall then? What risk? What perdition? What redemption, and of what? What salvation? The whole inventory of fundamental Judeo-Christian ideas is inapplicable in a naturally, i.e. inevitably evolving world. Who is right? Those for whom evolution is an organically determined process in which descent and ascent are only two successive phases of a single cosmic vibration? Or those who see in evolution a cosmic tragedy and drama whose essence and leitmotif correspond to the parable of the prodigal son? What is it to be right? Are the passengers on a boat who have tickets for the voyage mistaken in considering the boat and its crew together as their means of navigation, transporting them following a determined route to the place of destination? For the travellers, the sea voyage is a natural process, something which happens by itself, provided that the ticket for the passage is paid. But can the captain, officers, and other members of the crew consider the passage over the sea in the same way as the passengers? Evidently not. For those who are responsible for the voyage, the passage signifies work, watches, manoeuvring, and orientation in order to follow the route and bear the load of responsibility for everything. For the crew, therefore, the voyage is in no way a kind of natural process, something which happens quite by itself. On the contrary, for them it is effort, struggle, and risk. It is the same with evolution. One sees it as a natural process when one looks at it through the eyes of the passengers, and one sees it as a tragedy and drama when one looks at it through the eyes of members of the crew. All determinism and fatalism, including naturalism and pantheism, places the responsibility somewhere beyond the moral human being, in nature, in God, in the stars. This is because all determinism or fatalism is a manifestation of the mentality and psychology of a passenger. Evolution seen through the eyes of a passenger, i.e. seen as something which works by itself, is nevertheless not an illusion. That is, one can indeed find and prove the existence of a process of evolution, or a progressive process, which on a phenomenological level takes place by itself. But what effort, what sacrifices, what errors and what transgressions hide behind the phenomenological facade of the process of evolution and universal progress, established and yet to be established? Here we have arrived at the heart of the Exotericism problem. Exotericism lives in processes, esotericism in tragedies and dramas. The ancient mysteries were tragedies and dramas. It is here where their esoteric character lies. Exotericism corresponds to the mentality and psychology of a passenger, esotericism to that of a member of the crew. But I repeat, exotericism is not purely and simply an illusion. For if 10 righteous men had been found in Sodom and Gomorrah, God would have spared these cities, and their inhabitants would have continued the process of evolution of their civilization and its customs. It is true that they would not have surmised Abraham's prayer, nor the role that the 10 righteous men would have played in the possibility for them to continue the process of their evolution. But they would have continued this process, in fact. It is similar for the whole of evolution, for there is natural selection, and there is spiritual selection, or election. The inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah had sinned against nature, and had been rejected by natural selection, but they would have been able to survive if 10 righteous men had been found amongst them. Then spiritual selection would have spared them, owing to the 10 righteous men. The fact of having evolved and of having given shelter to 10 righteous men among them would have been sufficient to justify the continuance of their existence, although their customs were contrary to nature. Spiritual selection would have prevailed, therefore, over natural selection, or, in other words, esotericism would have determined and saved the exoteric life. Esotericism is therefore not a life and activity which seeks secrecy. It is based on the mentality and psychology of the crew, and its secrets are secrets only insofar as the mentality and psychology of the passengers is such as to refuse to participate in responsibility. At the same time, there is no more serious error than that of wanting to organize a community or fraternity which would be called to play either the role of an instrument of spiritual selection or election, or even the role of a spiritual elite. For one can neither assume the function of election nor consider oneself as elect. It would be morally monstrous if a group of people were to say, "We shall choose 10 righteous men for our time," or "We are the righteous of our time." Because one does not elect, one is elected. Knowledge of the fact of spiritual selection or election, and of the role that it plays in the history of mankind and in evolution in general, can therefore certainly give rise to the birth of a false esotericism, i.e. to the formation of groups, communities or fraternities which believe themselves authorized to elect, or believe themselves to be elect. False prophets and false elects, or Christs, of which the gospel speaks, are and will be produced by false esotericism, cultivated by those who assume the right of election or spiritual selection. It may be added that no Christian saint has ever considered himself otherwise than as a great sinner, and that there was no righteous man or prophet of the Old Testament who was not called or chosen from above. But let us return to the subject of evolution. Evolution, as understood exoterically, is a cosmic process. Biological or spiritual, this is not important. Whilst esoterically understood, it is a drama or mystery in the sense of the ancient mysteries. And it is only for evolution thus understood that the ideas of the fall, perdition, redemption, and salvation become not only applicable, but also necessary. First, let us take the ideas perdition and salvation and try to understand them on the level of cosmic evolution, or cosmic drama. Do not be shocked, dear unknown friend, and do forgive me, for I am going to relate a myth, a cosmic myth from the Gnosis, not ancient or modern, but from the eternal Gnosis, because the cosmic drama is in reality a myth made flesh, and it must first be seen as such before one draws principal intellectual lessons from it. Therefore, I am going to relate the myth in order to draw from it some ideas, which are related to the arcanum of the tarot with which we are occupied. When the Father had accomplished his work on the 7th day of creation, that he had made through his word, he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had made. And the Father blessed the 7th day, and he sanctified it, because on this day he rested from all his work that he had created. Thus the 7th day is blessed and sanctified, because it is the day not of the world and the movement of the world, but rather of the Father himself alone. It is the 7th part of the circle of movement of the world, when he withdraws and becomes immobile and silent. Thus it was that the circle of movement of the world was not closed, but remained open. And the 7th day was sanctified and blessed as the open part of the circle of movement of the world, in such a way that the beings of the world had access to the Father, and the Father had access to them. But the serpent said, "There is no freedom for the world, in so far as the circle of the world is not closed. because freedom is to be in oneself without interference from outside, especially from above, on the part of the Father. The world will always follow the will of the Father and not its own, insofar as there is an opening in the circle of the world, insofar as the Sabbath exists. And the serpent took his tail in his mouth and thus formed a closed circle. He turned himself with great force and thus created in the world the great swirl which caught hold of Adam and Eve. And the other beings upon whom Adam had impressed the names that he gave them followed them. And the serpent said to the beings of the world moving on this side of the closed circle, that he formed by taking his tail in his mouth and setting himself in rotation, "Here is your way. You will commence by my tail and you will arrive at my head. Then you will have traversed the length of the circle of my being, and you will have within you the entire closed circle, and thus you will be free as I am free." But woman guarded the memory of the world opened towards the Father and the Holy Sabbath, and she offered herself for the rending of the closed circle in herself, in order to give birth to children issuing from the world beyond it, from the world where there is the Sabbath. Thus originated the suffering of her pregnancy, and thus originated sorrow on this side of the world of the serpent. And hostility came between woman and the serpent, between the generations of woman giving birth with pain and the generations of the serpent giving birth with pleasure. The former will crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent will wound the heel of the woman. For woman moves in a contrary sense to the movement of the serpent, and her head reaches to the tail of the serpent, and her heels touch the head of the serpent. This is because in the world, which is the current of the serpent, suffering is its counter-movement. It was through the counter-movement of suffering that there originated the countercurrent of the sons of woman, which is the thought born from suffering and from memory of the world of the Sabbath. Thus the sons of woman set up altars to the Father, this side of the world of the serpent. And Enosh, son of Seth, not only worshipped the Father, but even came to know his name. He began to invoke the name of the Father. But Enoch, a descendant of Seth, went still further. He walked with God, Genesis 5:22. He did not pass through the bitterness of death, which for living beings on this side of the circle of the serpent is the way out of the closed circle of the serpent, for he was taken up by the Father, Genesis 5:24. For about that time thought aspiring to the Father succeeded in piercing the circle of the serpent, and in accomplishing an opening in the closed circle. Thus initiation and prophecy could be established on this side of the world of the serpent. Initiation kept living the memory of the world of the Sabbath, and prophecy nourished the hope of deliverance from the circle of the serpent, and the future re-establishment of the world of the Sabbath. Buddhas taught the way of going out from the world of the serpent, and of arriving at the repose of the Sabbath. But the prophets claimed the transformation of the world of the serpent from within it, by the coming of the Word which will live in the world of the serpent, and will re-establish within the world of the serpent, not only the Sabbath, but also the other 6 days of creation, such as they were before a third of the beings from each of them were uprooted and swept down by the closed whirlwind of the serpent. Revelation 12:4. This came to be. The woman virgin, who is the soul of the counter-movement to the serpent, and of suffering since the beginning of the world of the serpent, received, conceived, and gave birth to the Word of the Father. And the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst men in the world of the serpent, full of grace and truth. John 1:14. This is the cosmic myth, the esoteric drama which underlies the exoteric process of evolution. It sets forth in the first place the idea of the open circle and the closed circle. The open circle, or the spiral, is the world before the fall of the 6 days of creation, crowned by the 7th day, the cosmic Sabbath, which corresponds to what one designates in mathematics as the step of the spiral. It suggests the idea of unlimited growth and advancement, being through its form only the introduction or antechamber to eternity. It promises unlimited progress. The closed circle, in contrast, is in principle only a prison, whatever its extent may be. It is a wheel which turns on itself and therefore suggests no advancement beyond its circle. The idea that the closed circle, or wheel, suggests is that of eternal repetition. Three historical personalities have vividly portrayed the idea of the cosmic wheel, although each of them did so in a different way. These are Gautama Buddha, Solomon, and Friedrich Nietzsche. The first told of the wheel of incarnations, where birth, sickness, old age, and death repeat themselves endlessly. The illumination that the Buddha had under the Bodhi tree revealed three truths to him: that the world is a wheel of births and deaths, that its movement is fundamentally nothing other than suffering, and that there is a way towards the center of the wheel, which is at rest. King Solomon had experience of the wheel, not as that of incarnations as with Buddha, but rather as inexorable fate, rendering all human hope and endeavor in vain. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises anew. The wind blows to the south and goes round to the north, round and round goes the wind, and repeats the same circuits. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is never full. The streams continue to flow to the place where they flow again. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes 1, 2-7, 9. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. I have applied my mind to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Ecclesiastes 1, 14-15, 17-18. This is the wheel of existence under the sun, of which Solomon, the wise and sorrowful king of Jerusalem, had a vision. And what practical advice does he give for posterity? That of supreme despair, as follows: There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your mind, and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Ecclesiastes 2, 24, 11, 9-10. It is Solomon's despair which made him into an Old Testament prophet, and gave his work a place between the Psalms and the books of the prophets. For Solomon portrays the emptiness, which he calls vanity, of the world of the serpent, and thus sets in relief the dilemma, either suicide or salvation on the part of God, for above the turning wheel of vanity there is God. Solomon's despair certainly belongs to the Holy Scripture. He portrays the world without Christ, which, moreover, the Buddha did also. Solomon's sadness is the sighing of creation for deliverance, having become conscious in him. Thus, Buddha rightly diagnosed the world of the serpent before Christ. Solomon wept over it, but Nietzsche, how monstrous, sang of it. Yes, Nietzsche saw and understood the wheel, the closed circle with no outlet, of the world of the serpent, and he said yes to it. He had the vision of eternal repetition, the eternal return, ewige Wiederkunft, and he identified it with eternity, although it is the very opposite of eternity. Quote, "Oh, how I should not burn for eternity, and for the married ring of rings, the ring of recurrence. Never yet found I the woman by whom I would have children, save it be by this woman that I love, for I love thee, O eternity. For I love thee, O eternity." Friedrich Nietzsche, Thus Spake Zarathustra, page 204. So he sings of the wheel that Buddha diagnosed as the great misfortune, and that Solomon estimated as the vanity of vanities. Poetical lyricism? It is more than this. Nietzsche certainly gave a poetic form to what he took to be his illumination. But this was only a summary of the last consequences drawn from modern science, not as method, but rather as mode of world outlook. In fact, according to the positivistic science of the end of the 19th century, the world is the sum total of innumerable combinations of simple particles, atoms. The combinations change endlessly, but at some time the number of possible combinations of atoms must necessarily reach its limit, and the number of new combinations must be exhausted. Then the previous combinations must repeat themselves. Therefore there will be some time in the future a day which will be the exact repetition of today. This is the scientific basis of the eternal return. Belief in the eternal return has a basis not only in the calculation of possible atomic combinations, but also in the scientific dogma of the quantitative constancy of matter and energy in the world. Nothing disappears, nothing appears in the world. The sum total of matter and energy in the world is constant. It is impossible for it to be either augmented or diminished. One can add nothing to it, nor take anything from it. The world is a closed circle from which nothing escapes, and into which nothing enters. Now, given that the world is a determined quantity, it is calculable. In the last analysis, it is only a determined number of particles and/or units of energy. Therefore, the number of combinations of these particles is no longer unlimited. The limit must be reached sometime, and then past combinations will be repeated. The eternal return of everything is therefore an inevitable conclusion in a world understood as a closed circle. In a world which is a closed circle, whose matter and energy are a constant quantity, there are no miracles, because the cosmic notion of a miracle entails inconstancy of the quantity of matter and energy in the world. A miracle takes place when the energy of the world undergoes either an increase or a diminution. This presupposes an opening in the circle of the world. For a miracle to be possible, the world must be an open circle, the world must be a spiral, i.e. it must have an uncreated sphere or a Sabbath, according to the cosmic myth narrated above. Now religion, all advanced religion, teaches that the world is an open circle. For this reason it insists upon the reality of miracles. Miracles, or the supernatural, are a reality of action from beyond the circle of nature, which appears to be closed. This is the reality of the cosmic Sabbath. The good news of religion is that the world is not a closed circle, that it is not an eternal prison, that it has an exit and an entrance. There is an entrance, which is why Christmas is a joyous festival. There is an exit, which is why Ascension is a festival. And that the world can be transformed, such as it is, into such as it was before the fall, this is the good news of the festival of festivals, the festival of the resurrection of Easter. The world as a closed circle, the world of the eternal return, the world where there is nothing new under the sun. What is this in reality? It is nothing other than cosmic hell. For the idea of hell can be understood as eternal existence in a closed circle. The closed circle of egoism would then be subjective and individual hell. The closed circle of a world of constant energy would then be objective and cosmic hell. Now we have the cosmic meaning of the terms salvation and perdition. Perdition is to be caught up in the eternal circulation of the world of the closed circle, the world without a Sabbath. Salvation is the life in the world of the open circle, or spiral, where there is both exit and entrance. Perdition is existence in the closed circle of the eternal return. Salvation is life under the open sky, where each day is new and unique, a miracle in the infinite chain of miracles. For God is not unknowable, but rather knowable, through inexhaustible and infinite knowledge. The infinite revelationability and knowability of God. This is the essence of the eternal Sabbath, the seventh day of creation. The seventh day of creation is that of eternal life and the source of miracles, for it is laden with possibilities of new things, and from it energies can be added to the so-called constant quantity of the phenomenal world, just as energies of this world can disappear into it. The two other terms in the cosmic drama of evolution are the fall and redemption. It is now easier to understand them after having drawn out to a certain extent the cosmic meaning of the terms salvation and perdition. For the fall is a cosmic event, a whirlwind set in motion by the closed circle of the serpent biting his tail and sweeping down part of the created world. Revelation 12:4. And redemption, to say it directly, is the cosmic act of the reintegration of the fallen world, first in creating an opening in its closed circle, religion, initiation, prophecy, then in instituting a path of exit, Buddhas, and entrance or avatars through this door, and lastly in transforming the fallen world from within by the radiation of the incarnated Word, or Jesus Christ. This is the meaning of these two terms on a level of generalization carried to a high degree. Let us now look at the meaning of these two terms more closely, so that the essential details can stand out from the totality. And this will comprise part 2 of the Wheel of Fortune.